Lu Fan approached the chest, got down on his knees, and opened it. The chest began to glow, and as he stared inside, he started to smile. While Kin Q held the magical staff with both hands, she began to approach Lu Fan. On the other side, the others simply stood silently watching. This chest contained several objects. The first one was the Divine Light Scepter. This object was of good quality, with 32 spirit points and 19 resistance points. The required level to use it was level 10. The scepter had an ability called Sacred Light Seal, which allowed the user to link the target with light. The duration of the link depended on the user's spiritual attributes. The second object was an outfit called Nightfall. This object was of good quality. It had 35 spirit points, 15 resistance points, and the required level to use it was level 10. This outfit had an ability called Light Current, which allowed the user to use light to create a barrier to protect themselves from attacks. The amount of damage that the barrier could absorb depended on the user's mental attributes. The third object was the Morning Ring. This object was of rare quality. It had 57 spirit points, 21 resistance points, and 12 strength points. The required level to use it was 15. This ring had an ability called Morning Aura that allowed the user to assign any target to obtain the Morning Aura. Any attack launched by the person with the aura would be added with a resentment value. When the resentment value accumulated, the attacking target would be affected by negative effects such as poisoning, bleeding, and dizziness caused by corpses. The fourth object was the Job Transfer Scroll. This object was of rare quality, and it had no points as it was a consumable. The effect of this object was to induce a low probability that a non-hidden profession would be transferred to the hidden profession of the current profession. Without thinking twice, Lu Fan chose the Job Transfer Scroll. He stood up, and while holding it in his hand, he turned his head towards Kin Q and the others. As his body emitted a blue energy, he revealed to them that he was going to choose the scroll. A system window appeared to inform him that he had successfully obtained the Job Transfer Scroll. Kin Q approached Lu Fan, and while holding the magical staff with one hand, with the other she began indicating to him that he shouldn't give the rest of the objects to them so deliberately since, after all, according to the rules, all the objects inside the chest belonged to him. While he was holding the scroll in one hand, he extended his other hand towards her, and while looking into her eyes, he explained that he wasn't pretending to be a knight since, after all, the spiritual equipment was more suitable for her. He also added that all he needed was this Job Transfer Scroll. Kin Q approached the chest, crouched down, and while looking inside, she explained to him that if she hadn't met him, then all of them could have died in this place. Lu Fan put his hands on his waist and simply stood still, silently watching without saying a word, wondering what she was planning to do. Several seconds later, while Kin Q was leaning on the ground with the help of her magic staff, she took out the Morning Ring from the chest. She extended her hand towards Lu Fan, and while looking into his eyes, she asked him to please accept this ring. Without thinking twice, Lu Fan grabbed the ring, and while he was holding it in his hand, he closed his eyes and with a smile thought that if she acted this way, then he couldn't do anything. Kin Q stood up, and while holding the magic staff, she started staring into Lu Fan's eyes and began to blush. She started wondering what else he hadn't shown. To her, he was a very difficult person to figure out. While Xiaojia was playing with Xiaoyi, Sunji approached them, and while looking at Lu Fan thought that he was a very interesting person. This Kai also approached them, and while looking at Lu Fan, she smiled and explained to Kin Q that it was time to prepare to return. That same night, several hours later, Lu Fan returned to his Aunt Han Ki's bun shop. She threw herself into his arms, closed her eyes, and explained that this was too dangerous because just by listening to him, she started getting scared since he had encountered so many dangers in the past few days. Upon hearing this, Lu Fan became somewhat confused. While he was staring into Han Ki's eyes, he asked her what had happened. He also requested that she release him quickly since he had been in the wilderness for several days and his clothes were very dirty. Instead of letting go, Han Ki hugged him even tighter, closed her eyes, and while crying, explained to him that Lu Fan wasn't dirty at all. She also added that because he had left without informing her, she hadn't been able to close her eyes during the past nights out of fear that once she woke up from sleep, her beloved Lu Fan wouldn't have returned home. Lu Fan closed his eyes, approached her, placed a hand on her back, and with a pleasant smile, apologized for leaving without warning. He also asked her not to worry because he would never let her worry again. While he was wiping Han Ki's tears away with his hand, he closed his eyes and explained with a smile that everything was fine. He also asked her to stop crying. Upon hearing this, she stopped crying and thought that Lu Fan was a very good person. Then she turned to one side and began stroking the head of the dragon Xiaoyi, who sat on the floor, closed her eyes, and started smiling because she was enjoying it a lot. While she was looking at Xiaoyi, she explained to Lu Fan that she had been very surprised when she first saw her. She also added that such a cute girl like her was truly an extremely powerful dragon. Lu Fan simply put a hand on his hip and while looking at Xiaoyi, smiled and remained silent without saying a word. Han Ki approached Xiaoyi, slightly bending his body towards her, and while looking into her eyes, she thought that she must not have eaten enough in the past few days, so she asked her if she was hungry. Upon hearing this, Xiaoyi started to look into her eyes and began nodding to indicate that yes, she was hungry. While the two of them were talking, Lu Fan approached them and while holding the job transfer scroll in his hand, looked at Han Ki and explained that this was the reward from the dungeon that he had specifically chosen for his aunt. He began to bring the job transfer scroll closer to her and while looking into her eyes, he explained that if she changed from one job to a hidden job, then she would no longer have to keep watching this bakery. Han Ki stood up and while looking into his eyes, she explained that she couldn't use the job transfer scroll because it was too expensive. She advised him to simply sell it since, as he had told her, he had left the weapons and equipment with the elder lady of the Qin family. She also asked him to sell this scroll to buy equipment, so that his results would be the best during the big exam. Just before she could finish speaking, Lu Fan took out his mobile phone and showed her the balance he had in his bank account. He closed his eyes and with a pleasant smile, he explained to her that he no longer lacked money or equipment. Seeing that Lu Fan had so much money in his bank account, she was amazed. He approached her and while looking into her eyes, he began to smile and explained to her that he had sold many of the materials he had collected during this trip. He also added that his travel companion Qin Q had promised him a reward of 100,000 yuan. After explaining this to her, he asked his aunt to believe his words as they would never have to worry about money again. Upon hearing this, Han Ki approached him, clenched her fist, and while looking into his eyes, couldn't help but shed tears. Lu Fan began to bring the job transfer scroll closer to her, and while looking into her eyes, he smiled and explained that it was better to use it now. She simply extended her hands towards the scroll and while looking at Lu Fan with a happy expression, she thought he was right. She opened the scroll, and it started to shine, while her body emitted a blue energy. Her hair and dress began to float, leaving her surprised. Lu Fan simply covered his face with his hand and started to smile. Several seconds later, slowly the scroll began to disappear and she was teleported to the system space. While Lu Fan was covering his face with his hand, he looked at Han Ki and asked if she had been successful. While her body was surrounded by blue energy, she slightly turned her head to the side and while looking at her hand, she explained to Lu Fan that she had succeeded as she had obtained the best hidden profession of a chef called Enchanted Cook. A system window appeared in front of him to inform him that Han Ki had obtained the hidden profession of an enchanted cook. Lu Fan was somewhat surprised and asked her if there was anything special about this new hidden profession. She explained to him that she had a skill called enchanted cooking that allowed her to prepare food with various buffs. Lu Fan praised her, telling her that her aunt's craftsmanship was very good, so the additional attributes were going to be very high. Upon hearing this, she started smiling and explained that he was just speaking highly of her. Lu Fan decided to change the subject and asked her where Xiaoyi had gone. Xiaoyi had taken advantage of the fact that the two of them were talking to go to the kitchen and eat all the food. After filling her stomach, she lay down on the floor and fell asleep. That same night in the study room of Qin's family villa, Qin Q went to her father's office and sat on a sofa. While her father was holding a glass in his hand, he turned towards her and asked if it had really been a dragon master named Lu Fan who had summoned a powerful black dragon that saved their lives. Qin Q closed her eyes and explained to him that her stubbornness had almost cost them all their lives. She also revealed to him that Lu Fan was too strong, despite both of them having hidden professions. The difference between her and him was like that between a firefly and the moon. While her father was swirling his wine glass, he started looking outside through the window and asked her if she had told anyone else about the dragon. She turned her head towards her father and replied that she hadn't because she had made an agreement with Lu Fan when they both returned, that the matter regarding the dragon would not be revealed by the Qin family. The name of her father was Qin Shanhai. He slightly turned his head towards her and praised her for doing a good job. He also asked her how many of those people who coveted the power of the dragons would remain calm once this information was leaked. Qin Q stood up, and while staring into her father's eyes, she clenched her fist tightly and begged him not to leak the information since Lu Fan had saved all their lives. She placed a hand on her chest and asked him if he had anything against Lu Fan's dragon. Qin Shanhai closed his eyes and started laughing out loud. He asked his daughter if she believed that her father was that kind of person. He also asked her how she was going to pay Lu Fan for saving their lives. Upon hearing this, Kin Kyu felt quite relieved. She closed her eyes and explained to her father that when she had invited Lu Fan to join the team, she had promised him a reward of 100,000 yuan. Qin Shanhai sighed, closed his eyes, and asked her to take a Bohemia card and personally go to Lu Fan's door the next day to thank him. She simply closed her eyes and nodded, then opened her eyes, and while staring into his eyes, she asked her father why he didn't come with her if he was so curious about Lu Fan. Qin Shanhai sighed, put a hand under his chin. The other rested on the arm of the chair, closed one eye, and explained to her that he also wanted to meet that Dragon Master but couldn't go because he had important matters to attend to tomorrow morning. Early in the morning of the next day, the princess of Taiki Kingdom came from the Dragon Kingdom to study in Zhonghai City. The princess was a short girl who carried a magic staff and was being accompanied by her assistant, a tall man with black hair wearing black armor, a magic wand, and carrying a suitcase. They often had business dealings, so they still had to greet them. But coming here when the big exam was about to take place wasn't for studying abroad. The princess and her assistant arrived at Han Ki's bakery. While she was preparing the pastries, she noticed that she had customers. She turned her head towards them and asked them to wait for a moment. Several seconds later, she slightly opened the door, closed her eyes, and with a smile explained to them that there were no steamed buns today. The princess placed a hand on her waist, turned her head slightly to the side, and while looking into her assistant's eyes, asked if this was the place they were looking for. She also asked if he had brought her to a garbage dump. Upon hearing this, the man closed his eyes, lowered his head slightly, and explained that he would never dare to do such a thing. He also added that according to their investigation, this was indeed the place they were looking for. The man forcefully knocked on the door of the bakery, causing the edge of the door to hit Han Ki and making her fly out in the process. Both entered the store and the princess turned her head towards her and explained that she was here to find someone. She asked if she knew a dragon master named Lu Fan. Upon hearing the noise, Lu Fan started coming down the stairs. He looked towards the door and while having one hand resting on the stairs, he asked his aunt if someone was looking for him. Han Ki stood up, closed one eye, clenched her teeth, and with one hand began to hold on to the part of her arm where she had been hit by the door. Upon seeing this, Lu Fan panicked and asked her if she was okay. While the princess covered her nose, she turned her body towards the man and told him that this place was filled with an unpleasant smell. Quickly, Lu Fan approached Han Ki and while holding her hand, looked into her eyes and asked if she was okay. He also asked what was happening. She closed her eyes and with a pleasant smile, she explained to him that she was fine. While they were talking, the princess caught his attention and asked him if he was Lu Fan. She explained that she herself, the princess, had made a special trip to see him out of honor. Lu Fan turned his head towards her and while looking into her eyes, he asked who she was and why she was looking for him. The man extended his hand towards her and explained to Lu Fan that she was Princess Jinju from the Taiki Kingdom, and he introduced himself as Chui Hongtai, the princess's assistant. Jinju put a hand on her hip and while holding the magical staff with the other, she stared into Lu Fan's eyes and with a smile explained that she had come here to give him the opportunity to move forward. While holding on to Han Ki, Lu Fan looked at them and asked the princess what she meant by move forward. While Jinju was looking into Lu Fan's eyes, she asked him if it was uncomfortable to become a dragon master. Then she reached out her hand towards Chui Hongtai. Upon seeing this, he closed his eyes and nodded. He crouched down on the ground and opened the suitcase. Upon seeing what the suitcase contained, Lu Fan was surprised and started sweating. It didn't take long for him to realize that it was a dragon egg. Princess Jinju told him that as long as he accepted the request, the dragon egg would be all his. Upon seeing Lu Fan's expression, she pointed at him with her finger and while staring into his eyes, she explained to him that the conditions were very simple. She wanted him to be her slave and do everything she told him without disobeying. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.